My wife packed her bags while I watched from our bedroom doorway, each folded sweater another nail in the coffin of our 5-year marriage. But what she told me next would change everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and what it means to be a father. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The morning sunlight streamed through our bedroom windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor where Sarah's suitcases lay open like wounds. I stood frozen, my coffee mug growing cold in my trembling hands, watching the woman I'd loved since college systematically erase herself from our shared life. "I never meant for it to happen this way, David," she said, not looking at me as she folded the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. Her voice carried that familiar tone of practiced explanation, the same one she'd used when she started working late, when her phone began buzzing at midnight, when she claimed her sudden interest in yoga was just about fitness. The grandfather clock in our hallway ticked with mechanical precision, each second stretching like hours. 5 years of marriage, 7 years together, and it was ending with the sound of zippers closing and drawers sliding shut. How long? The words scraped out of my throat like broken glass. Sarah's hands stilled on a stack of photographs from our honeymoon. 6 months, she whispered. Maybe longer. I don't know when feelings became more. Marcus Rodriguez, her college boyfriend, the one who'd broken her heart so completely she'd sworn off serious relationships until she met me. The same man who'd been divorced, relocated back to Chicago, and coincidentally joined Sarah's marketing firm as creative director. What were the odds? I thought about all the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore. Late nights at the office became weekend strategy sessions. Business dinners stretched into networking events. Her phone, once casually left on countertops, now stayed glued to her side like a lifeline. "Are you in love with him?" I asked, though the answer was written in every careful movement she made, every item she chose to pack or leave behind. I think I always was. Her honesty felt like a physical blow. "We have history, David, a connection you and we never quite found." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 2 years helping her heal from Marcus's abandonment, patient through her trust issues, gentle with her scarred heart. I'd been the safe choice, the reliable one who'd never leave. And now she was leaving me for the very man who'd taught her that love meant pain. "I need you to understand," Sarah continued, finally meeting my eyes in the dresser mirror. "This isn't about you not being enough. You're a good man, David. You deserve someone who can love you completely." But I'd thought she did love me completely. The way she laughed at my terrible jokes, how she curled against me during movies, her habit of leaving little notes in my lunch bag, had it all been performance, guilt, or just the comfortable affection you'd show a roommate? "There's something else," she said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. My heart, already shattered, somehow found new ways to break. I set my coffee mug on the nightstand with hands that shook despite my efforts at composure. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire, acrid and choking. I gripped the doorframe for support, my knees suddenly unreliable. "How far along?" My voice sounded foreign to my ears. 8 weeks. She turned to face me fully now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The timing. It's Marcus's baby, David, I'm sure. 8 weeks. 2 months of carrying another man's child while sharing. My bed, eating meals I'd cooked, accepting my kisses goodnight. 2 months of deception so complete it made our entire marriage feel like fiction. I thought about the morning sickness she'd blamed on stress, her sudden aversion to coffee, the way she'd been falling asleep earlier. All the signs had been there, painted with someone else's brush. "Were you ever going to tell me if he hadn't come back?" The question emerged before I could stop it. Sarah's face crumpled. "I don't know. Maybe. I wanted to believe we could work through this, that I could choose to love you the way you deserved. But when Marcus told me he wanted to try again, that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life letting me go." She didn't need to finish. The fantasy of our marriage had ended the moment her ex-boyfriend crooked his finger and beckoned her home. The living room felt smaller with Marcus Rodriguez sitting on my couch, his expensive suit a stark contrast to my weekend clothes. He'd arrived 30 minutes after I'd called, prompt as a business meeting, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "I appreciate you being mature about this," Marcus said, adjusting his Italian leather watch. "Sarah was worried you'd make things difficult." I studied the man who'd stolen my wife and planted his child in her womb. He was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average, charismatic where I was quiet, successful in that flashy way that impressed strangers at parties. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced from years of client presentations. "Difficult how?" I asked, settling into the armchair across from him. Sarah sat between us on the love seat, her hands folded protectively over her still flat stomach. "Legal complications, custody battles, financial disputes," Marcus spoke as if he were discussing a merger rather than the destruction of my marriage. Sarah and I want to handle this transition smoothly, especially with the baby coming. The baby, his baby. The words still felt like shards of glass, Ev. Every time someone mentioned the pregnancy. David's not vindictive, Sarah said quickly, shooting me a look that mixed gratitude with guilt. He wouldn't use a child as a weapon. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good, because I intend to be a real father this time. I've learned from my mistakes. This time. The phrase revealed everything about Marcus Rodriguez's character. He'd abandoned Sarah once before, left her broken and pregnant with someone else's child, mine, as it turned out. Now he was back to claim what he'd discarded, confident in his ability to pick up where he'd left off. What mistakes were those? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment. I was young, focused on my career. I didn't understand what I had with Sarah, but success teaches you what matters. Money, in other words. He'd become wealthy enough to afford a wife and child as accessories to his accomplished life. The timing of his return, just as Sarah and I had started discussing starting a family of our own, felt calculated rather than coincidental. Sarah mentioned you've been divorced, I continued, enjoying the way his confidence flickered. Briefly married to someone incompatible, he said with dismissive ease. We both realized we were better apart. No children involved. Clean separation. I wondered if his ex-wife would describe their divorce as clean, or if Marcus had enough money to make inconvenient truths disappear. Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside him. Marcus has changed, David. He's more mature now, more committed. The way she defended him, the light in her eyes when she spoke his name, it cut deeper than any infidelity. She believed in him with the faith she'd never quite managed to have in us. I'm sure he has, I said, keeping my voice neutral. What happens now? Marcus reached over and took Sarah's hand, a gesture of possession disguised as action. Sarah moves in with me. We prepare for the baby together, build the life we should have had years ago, and I would be relegated to footnote status in Sarah's story, the placeholder husband who'd kept her warm until her real love returned. The arrangement felt medieval, like watching property change hands between more powerful men. What about the divorce? I asked. Uncontested, Sarah said quickly. We can file no fault, split our assets fairly. I don't want anything from you, David. You've given me enough. But I wanted to give more. Despite everything, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the casual cruelty of being replaced, I still loved the woman sitting 3 feet away from me. 7 years don't disappear because someone else plants their flag in your territory. I need some time to process this, I said, standing to signal the end of our civilized discussion. Marcus rose as well, straightening his jacket with practiced efficiency. Of course, Sarah will collect the rest of her things tomorrow while you're at work. Less awkward for everyone. Less awkward. Reducing our marriage to a logistics problem would minimize the devastation. He shook my hand with the firm grip of a man sealing a business deal, completely comfortable with his role in dismantling my life. Sarah lingered by the door after Marcus walked to his car. I know you hate me right now, she said, her voice small and uncertain. I don't hate you. The admission surprised us both. I'm hurt, angry, and confused, but I don't hate you. I never wanted it to happen this way. But you wanted it to happen. She nodded, tears finally spilling over. I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry for all of it. I watched Marcus's BMW pull out of our driveway, carrying away the woman I'd planned to grow old with. The house felt hollow and too quiet, like a museum of a life that had never actually existed. That night, I sat in our bedroom, my bedroom now, staring at the empty spaces where Sarah's belongings had been. Her jewelry box, her stack of books, her collection of candles that had made everything smell like vanilla and promises. But it was the baby that haunted my thoughts most, some innocent child who would grow up calling Marcus dad while never knowing that another man had loved their mother enough to forgive anything, even this. 3 days later, I sat across from Sarah at the coffee shop where we'd had our first date 7 years ago. She'd chosen the location, hoping familiar ground would soften whatever conversation we needed to have about lawyers and property division. She looked different already, glowing with the kind of happiness I'd never been able to give her. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach, and she wore a new necklace, probably a gift from Marcus. You wanted to talk? She said, stirring sugar into her decaf coffee. I thought we'd covered everything. I studied her face, memorizing details I'd taken for granted during our marriage. There is a small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way she bit her lower lip when nervous. The gold flecks in her brown eyes caught sunlight from the window. I have a proposition, I said, pulling out the folder I'd spent 2 sleepless nights preparing. Sarah's eyebrows rose. David, if this is about reconciliation, it's about the baby. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, protective and possessive. What about the baby? I opened the folder and slid the first document across the small table between us. I want to adopt your child. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything rational and self-preserving. Sarah stared at the papers, her mouth slightly open, clearly trying to process what I'd suggested. You want to what? She whispered. Adopt the baby. Legally. Be the father on the birth certificate, provide financial support, and make medical decisions. Everything. But it's not you. Your child, David. It's Marcus's baby. I know exactly whose baby it is, I said calmly. And I also know that Marcus abandoned you once before. What happens if he does it again? Sarah's face flushed. He won't. He's different now. Maybe, but children deserve backup plans. I leaned forward, my voice intense with conviction. I'm offering to be that backup plan. If Marcus stays, great. He can be the primary father, but legally, I'll be there too. Insurance against history repeating itself. She flipped through the adoption papers, her confusion evident. This doesn't make any sense. Why would you want to raise another man's child? Because I still love you, I thought. Because I'd rather be connected to you through someone else's baby than not connected at all. Because watching you disappear felt entirely like dying slowly. Because that child didn't choose any of this, I said instead. Because children deserve stability, security, and adults who put their needs first. Because I have the resources and willingness to provide that. Sarah set down the papers and looked at me for the first time since she'd announced her pregnancy. You're serious about this? Completely serious. I've already spoken with a lawyer. The adoption would be immediate upon birth before Marcus can establish paternity, clean, legal, permanent. Marcus will never agree to this. Marcus doesn't have to agree. You do. I pulled out the second document. This is a co-parenting agreement. You maintain full custody and make all major decisions. I provide financial support, medical coverage, and educational expenses. I'd be the legal father, but you'd be the primary parent. She stared at the papers as if they might burst into flames. David, this is crazy. You can't want to raise Marcus's child. I want to raise your child, I corrected. The genetics are secondary to the commitment. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The baby would be part of Sarah, carrying half her DNA, inheriting her expressions and mannerisms. If I couldn't have Sarah, I could love the piece of her that would exist in her child. What's in it for you? She asked suspiciously. This seems like you're sacrificing everything for nothing in return. I get to be a father, I said. I get to matter to someone who shares your blood. I get a purpose that connects me to the person I love most, even if I can't have her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. David, you can't build a life around being my backup plan. I'm not. I'm building a life around being your child's primary plan. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, mascara smearing slightly. What happens when you meet someone else? When you want children of your own? Then that hypothetical woman will know from day one that I come with a child I love completely. If she can't handle that, she's not the right person for me. The coffee shop buzzed with afternoon conversations around us. Business deals, romantic dates, friends catching up on gossip. Normal people living everyday lives without making insane proposals about raising their ex-wife's baby. Marcus would hate this, Sarah said quietly. Probably. But Marcus isn't thinking about worst-case scenarios. I am. I leaned back in my chair. What if something happens to him? What if his company transfers him? What if he decides fatherhood is too restrictive for his lifestyle? You'd be a single mother with no support system. I'd have my family. Your parents live in Florida and barely approve of me. You think they'll be thrilled about an out-of-wedlock grandchild from your college boyfriend who abandoned you once before? Sarah flinched at the direct hit. Her parents had loved me precisely because I was safe, stable, and unlikely to break their daughter's heart. Marcus represented everything they'd feared when Sarah first fell in love with him. This is emotional blackmail, she accused. This is risk. Management, I countered. I'm offering security for you and protection for your child. The only cost is letting me matter to both of you. She gathered the papers into a neat stack, her movements decisive. I need time to think about this. Of course. But Sarah? I reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. Think about what's best for the baby, not what's easiest for the adults. As she walked away, carrying my proposal in her purse and Marcus's child in her womb, I felt the first stirring of hope I'd experienced in days. It was a desperate plan. Maybe even a foolish one, but it was better than losing everything without a fight. 2 weeks passed before Sarah called. 2 weeks of silence that stretched like torture, filled with imagined conversations and scenarios that ranged from acceptance to restraining orders. I'd thrown myself into work, staying late at the architectural firm where I'd been designing other people's dream homes while my own life crumbled. Can you meet me at the park? She asked without preamble. The one by the lake where we used to walk. I found her sitting on our old bench, the one facing the water where we discussed buying a house, planning vacations, and debating names for future children. She wore a loose sweater that hid the slight swell of her growing pregnancy, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger, more vulnerable. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said as I settled beside her, careful to maintain distance. It's insane. Most worthwhile things are. She turned to study my profile. Why are you doing this, David? And don't give me another speech about child welfare. Be honest. I watched a family of ducks paddle across the lake, the parents flanking their offspring in protective formation. Because I love you, I said finally. Because I'd rather be connected to you through someone else's child than not connected at all. Because maybe, someday, you'll realize what you gave up. That's what I thought. Her voice cards always there. Ride sadness rather than anger. David, you can't love me into loving you back. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to love your child into having the best possible life. I faced her directly. Whether that includes me romantically or not is separate from my commitment to being the best father I can be. And if Marcus and I get married, if we have more children together, you'd be okay being the odd man out? The question cut deep, but I considered it during countless sleepless nights. I'd be okay being whatever that child needs me to be. Uncle, stepfather, family friend. The title matters less than the commitment. Sarah pulled out the adoption papers, now slightly wrinkled from handling. I showed these to Marcus. My stomach tightened. And? He's furious. Called it a manipulation tactic, said you're trying to control me through the baby. She smoothed the documents on her lap. He's probably right. Is that what you think? I think you're a good man making a desperate choice because you can't let go. She looked at me with the kind of clear-eyed honesty that had attracted me to her in the first place. But I also think you mean every word about loving this child. I do. Marcus said if I sign these papers, he'll reconsider our relationship, that he can't be with someone who ties herself legally to her ex-husband. The ultimatum didn't surprise me. Marcus struck me as someone who demanded complete control, unable to share even theoretical influence over his claimed territory. And what did you tell him? I asked, though her presence here suggested the answer. I told him that anyone who would abandon a child over paperwork probably isn't ready to be a father anyway. Sarah's voice carried steel I'd rarely heard during our marriage. I told him that if he truly loves me, he'll understand I need to protect this baby from all possible harm, including his potential absence. Hope flickered in my chest like a candle in the wind. So you'll sign? I have conditions. Name them. She pulled out a handwritten list, her careful script covering half a page. First, you get therapy, real therapy, to work through your feelings about our marriage ending. I won't have you using this child as an emotional replacement for what we lost. Agreed. Second, you date other people. Actively. I want to see you building a life that isn't centered around waiting for me to come back. That one stung, but I nodded. Okay. Third, if Marcus proves himself as a father and partner, you step back gracefully. You don't compete for the child's affection or try to undermine his parental authority. As long as he's good to both of you, yes. Fourth, complete transparency about your motivations. If anyone asks why you're adopting your ex-wife's baby, you tell them the truth. No, making me look like the villain in some noble sacrifice story. I considered this. The truth would be humiliating. That I loved Sarah too much to let go completely. That I'd rather be a part-time father to her child than a completely absent ex-husband, but lies would be worse. I can do that. Sarah studied my face for signs of hesitation. David, once you sign these papers, you're legally responsible for this child until they turn 18. That's 18 years of financial support, medical decisions, and educational costs. Even if I move away, even if you never see the baby, you're still legally the father. I understand. And emotionally? She leaned forward, her voice intense. You're committing to love someone else's biological child as if they were your own. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. Every day for 18 years, you'll have to make that choice. Sarah, I made that choice the moment I understood you were pregnant. Everything since then has just been logistics. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for cracks in my resolve. Marcus thinks you're trying to trap me. Are you trapped? No. The answer came without hesitation. If anything, this gives me freedom. I can love Marcus without worrying about what happens if he leaves again. I can focus on being the best mother possible instead of constantly managing his insecurities. She signed the papers there, on the bench, her signature making me legally responsible for a child who would be born in 6 months. As she handed me the documents, our fingers touched briefly. Thank you, she said softly. Thank you for trusting me with this. As we walked back to our cars, Sarah asked, Do you think you can love this baby completely and without reservation? I already do, I said, and realized it was true. Somewhere during the weeks of planning and hoping, I'd stopped thinking of the pregnancy as Marcus's baby or even Sarah's baby. In my heart, this was already my child to protect and love. The legal papers felt heavy in my hands, weighted with promises and possibilities I couldn't fully comprehend. But for the first time since Sarah had packed her bags, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of just away from loss. The next 6 months transformed me from a devastated ex-husband to an expectant father in ways I'd never anticipated. While Sarah bloomed with pregnancy under Marcus's attentive care, I threw myself into preparation with the intensity of a military campaign. I converted our old guest room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow that would work for either gender. Each brushstroke felt like an act of faith, covering traces of the marriage that had failed while building space for the relationship that might succeed. The room slowly filled with everything a baby might need: crib, changing table, car seat, mountains of tiny clothes in newborn sizes. Sarah visited occasionally, ostensibly to approve purchases but to ensure I was serious about this commitment. She'd run her hands along the crib rails, test the rocking chair's comfort, nod approvingly at my choices. "You don't have to do all this," she said during one visit, finding me assembling a complicated high chair. "The baby won't live here." "But they'll visit here," I replied, wrestling with instruction diagrams that seemed designed by sadists. "And when they do, I want them to have everything they need." Marcus had made it clear he wouldn't be contributing to my preparations. "Let him waste his money," Sarah reported him saying. "The kid will know who his real father is." I signed up for parenting classes at the local community center, sitting among pregnant couples who initially assumed I was a single father. When I explained the situation, that I was adopting my ex-wife's baby, reactions ranged from confused sympathy to outright suspicion. "That's either the most loving thing I've ever heard," said Janet, a first-time mother in her 30s, "or the most unhealthy." "Maybe both," I admitted. The classes covered everything from diaper changing to sleep schedules, from infant CPR to postpartum depression. I took detailed notes, practiced swaddling on a doll named Baby Bob, and learned the difference between hungry cries and tired cries. Dr. Patricia Henley, the instructor, pulled me aside after the 4th session. "David, I have to ask, are you sure about this arrangement? Adopting your ex-wife's child is unusual." "Unusual doesn't mean wrong," I said. "This baby will have multiple adults committed to their welfare. How is that a bad thing?" "It's not necessarily, but children need stability, clear relationships, and defined roles. What happens when this child asks why their biological father lives with mommy while their legal father lives alone?" I'd been dreading that conversation since signing the adoption papers. "I guess we'll figure that out when the time comes." Children are smart, David. They sense complicated emotions even when adults try to hide them. Make sure your love for this child is pure, not contaminated by your feelings about their mother. Her words haunted me through the remaining classes and into the sleepless nights that preceded Sarah's due date. Was I capable of loving this child purely, or would I always see them as a connection to Sarah, a consolation prize in my failed marriage? The therapy Sarah had insisted upon helped, gradually. Dr. Michael Torres specialized in relationship transitions and grief counseling, areas where I'd become an unwilling expert. "You're grieving the death of your marriage while simultaneously preparing to become a father," he observed during our 3rd session. "Those are contradictory emotional processes." "Tell me about it," I said. Half the time I'm excited about the baby, the other half I'm devastated about Sarah. Sometimes I feel both things simultaneously." "That's normal. Grief and hope aren't mutually exclusive." Dr. Torres leaned forward in his chair. "But David, you need to be honest about your motivations here. Are you adopting this child as an act of love or as an attempt to maintain a connection with Sarah? Can it be both?" "It can be, but one motivation needs to be primary. If your love for this child is conditional on your relationship with Sarah, that's problematic. Children deserve unconditional love." I spent weeks working through that distinction, learning to separate my role as Sarah's ex-husband from my upcoming role as the baby's father. It was harder than I'd expected, like trying to untangle 2 ropes that had been knotted together for years. Meanwhile, Sarah's pregnancy progressed normally. I attended some doctor's appointments, awkward affairs where I sat in the waiting room while Marcus accompanied her inside. Occasionally, the receptionist would ask if I was the father, leading to uncomfortable explanations about our complicated arrangement. "It's unusual," Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah's obstetrician, said when I finally met her. "But not unprecedented. I've seen successful co-parenting arrangements in much stranger circumstances, such as sperm donors who become involved in their biological children's lives, step-parents who maintain relationships after divorces, extended family members who take on primary parenting roles." She smiled warmly. "The key is putting the child's needs first, which seems to be everyone's intention here." As Sarah's due date approached, the logistics became more complex. Who would be in the delivery room? Whose name would LD go on the birth certificate first? How would we handle those first crucial hours when legal documents and emotional reality might conflict? "I want you there," Sarah told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. These had become routine, chances for us to coordinate our approach to co-parenting. Maybe not in the delivery room itself, but in the hospital. As soon as the baby is born, you'll officially be their father. Marcus had protested this arrangement, arguing that the first few hours should be private family time. He's not family, I'd heard him tell Sarah during one of their heated phone conversations. He's a legal technicality. But Sarah had stood firm. David will be this child's father for the next 18 years. He deserves to be there from the beginning. The night before Sarah's due date, I sat in the completed nursery, surrounded by tiny clothes and unopened packages of diapers. The mobile above the crib turned slowly, casting gentle shadows on the yellow walls. Everything was ready, except me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Contractions started. Marcus is driving me to the hospital. Meet us there? I grabbed my keys, my overnight bag, and the folder containing all the legal documents that would make me a father by morning. After months of preparation, the moment had finally arrived. As I drove through empty streets toward the hospital, I realized that regardless of biology or complicated emotions, I was about to become responsible for another human being's entire existence. The weight of that responsibility felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Everything I'd lost when Sarah left was about to be replaced by something I'd never expected to gain: a child to love unconditionally, a purpose that extended beyond my happiness, a chance to matter in the most fundamental way possible. St. Mary's Hospital hummed with the controlled chaos of midnight medical activity as I rushed through automatic doors, carrying a duffel bag packed with clothes for 3 days and emotional preparate. Ian for 18 years. Sarah was already in labor and delivery, Marcus pacing the waiting area like an expectant father, which technically he was. However, the legal reality was far more complicated. He looked up as I approached, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of stress. "She's asking for you," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Room 314. The adoption papers are with the nurse." I found Sarah propped against pillows, her face flushed with exertion and anticipation. She'd been in labor for 4 hours, her contractions growing more substantial and more frequent. "David, thank God you're here," she breathed, reaching for my hand. "I was afraid you'd miss it." "I wouldn't miss this for anything," I said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to change our lives forever." She squeezed my fingers during another contraction. "Are you ready for this?" Was anyone ever ready to become a parent, especially under these circumstances? "As ready as I can be," I said. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, surgical scrubs replacing her usual white coat. "Good, everyone's here. We're getting close now, maybe another hour or two." Marcus stood stiffly in the corner, clearly uncomfortable with my presence, but unwilling to leave. The following hours passed in a blur of medical activity, coaching Sarah through contractions and navigating the strange dynamic of 2 men supporting 1 woman through labor. At 3:47 a.m., Dr. Martinez announced, "I can see the head. Sarah, you're about to meet your baby." The final minutes stretched like hours, filled with Sarah's concentrated effort and the medical team's professional encouragement. Then suddenly, the room filled with the sharp cry of a newborn baby, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. "Congratulations, it's a boy," Dr. Martinez announced, holding up a red wrinkle. "Ed, absolutely perfect little human being. A son. I was the father of a son." The nurse placed him on Sarah's chest for those first crucial moments of bonding, the baby's cries immediately settling as he felt his mother's familiar heartbeat. Sarah sobbed with relief and joy, touching tiny fingers and toes as if to confirm he was real. "He's beautiful," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks just like you did in your baby pictures." I stared at the infant, trying to memorize every detail. Dark hair plastered to his small head, tiny fists waving in protest at the bright lights, eyes squinted shut against this strange new world. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "David, would you like to hold him?" the nurse asked, approaching with practiced confidence. My hand shook as she placed 8 pounds and 3 ounces of entirely dependent human life into my arms. The baby settled immediately, his breathing evening out as if recognizing something familiar in my touch. "Hello, little one," I whispered, studying his face for any resemblance to Sarah, to Marcus, to anyone. He just looked like himself. Unique, precious, mine. "What's his name?" Dr. Martinez asked, preparing the birth certificate paperwork. Sarah and Marcus had discussed this privately, but she looked to me before answering. "James David Rodriguez Brown." My middle name combined with Marcus's surname and mine. The hyphenated last name made our complicated arrangement official. This child belonged to all of us in different ways, with different roles, but equal commitment. The following hours blurred together. Nurses handled paperwork while I completed the adoption process with the hospital social worker. Marcus made phone calls to family members, announcing James's arrival with pride and joy. Sarah slept between feedings, exhausted but radiating happiness. I refused to put James down, holding him through diaper changes, feeding attempts, and the constant stream of medics all staff checking vitals. Every time someone asked if I was the father, I answered with growing confidence, yes, I'm his father. He's very calm with you, noticed Jenny, our day nurse. Some adoptive parents struggle with immediate bonding, but you two seem perfectly matched. Perfectly matched. I like the sound of that. Marcus tried to hold James several times, but the baby fussed each time, crying until I took him back. He doesn't know me yet, Marcus said with forced casualness, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Give it time, Sarah said diplomatically. Babies sense tension. Once everyone settles into their routine, he'll be comfortable with all of us. But privately, I wondered if James somehow understood our complicated situation. Did babies instinctively know who would be there every night, who would get up for 2 a.m. feedings, who would sign permission slips and attend parent-teacher conferences? The legal formalities were concluded by evening. James David Rodriguez Brown was officially my adopted son, with full parental rights and responsibilities. Sarah retained primary custody, but I was legally his father in every way that mattered. As visiting hours ended, Marcus prepared to take Sarah and James home to his downtown apartment. I'd expected this moment to be devastating, watching another man carry my son away to a house I'd never see. But something unexpected happened when Marcus reached for James. The baby started crying immediately, that sharp, distressed wail that cuts through every adult's heart. Marcus tried soothing him, rocking gently, making soft sounds, but James only cried harder. Here, let me try, Sarah said, taking him from Marcus. James quieted slightly but remained fussy, his tiny face red with agitation. Maybe he's hungry again, Marcus suggested, though we'd just finished feeding him 20 minutes earlier. I approached hesitantly. Can I? The moment Sarah placed James in my arms, he settled completely. His crying stopped, his breathing evened out, and he made that soft baby sound that might have been contentment. 3 adults stared in amazement at this tiny human who'd just expressed his first clear preference. That's unusual, Dr. Martinez observed from the doorway. Newborns don't typically show such strong attachments immediately after birth. Marcus's jaw tightened. He just needs time to adjust to me. Of course, I said quickly, not wanting to create more tension. Babies are unpredictable. Tomorrow, he might prefer you completely. But even as I said it, I felt James's slight fist curl around my finger with surprising strength, as if he had no intention of letting go. The arrangement we'd negotiated on paper proved far more complicated in practice. James lived with Sarah and Marcus in their downtown apartment, but I saw him nearly every day during those first crucial months. My morning routine began at 6 a.m. with a text from Sarah. James slept 4 hours straight, or rough night, he was up every 2 hours, or can you pick up more formula, we're running low. I'd arrive at their apartment with supplies, groceries, or just extra hands for whatever crisis had emerged overnight. Marcus tolerated my presence with barely concealed irritation. Still, Sarah welcomed the help with the gratitude of an exhausted new mother. You don't have to come every day, she said one morning as I took James so she could shower. Marcus can help with the morning routine. Marcus left for a business trip at 6 a.m., I pointed out, settling into the rocking chair with my son. Besides, I want to be here. The truth was more complicated. I craved these moments with James, the weight of his small body against my chest, the trust he showed by falling asleep in my arms, the way he tracked my voice across the room. Every day spent away from him felt like missing pieces of a puzzle I desperately needed to complete. James thrived during these early weeks, growing from 8 pounds to 12, his eyes focusing with increasing awareness, his first social smiles appearing right on schedule, but those smiles came most readily for me, a fact that both thrilled and worried me. The pediatrician says babies sometimes bond more strongly with their most consistent caregiver, Sarah explained after a tough evening when James refused to settle for anyone but me. You're here more than Marcus because of his work schedule. Marcus's work schedule, his essential business trips to Los Angeles, his unavoidable client dinners that stretched past midnight, his critical weekend conferences that coincided with James's most difficult days. I began to see the pattern Sarah seemed determined to ignore. He's building his client base, she defended when I gently suggested Marcus might prioritize differently. The first year is crucial for establishing his reputation at the new firm. I'd heard similar justifications during our marriage when she'd defended her workaholism, back when I'd foolishly believed commitment meant showing up consistently rather than sporadically with grand gestures. By James's 2-month birthday, I was handling the majority of his care. Night feedings when Sarah was too exhausted, doctor's appointments when Marcus was traveling, emergency diaper runs when they'd forgotten to stock up. My downtown apartment gradually filled with baby equipment, a pack-and-play crib, an extra car seat, and an emergency formula supply. You've moved in, Sarah observed one evening, finding me assembling a baby swing in their living room while James napped in my arms. Just making sure he has what he needs wherever he is, I said, but we both understood the more profound truth. I was creating a safety net for the moments when Marcus's commitment wavered. Those moments came more frequently as James grew more demanding and less conveniently portable. A crying baby doesn't rot. Spect business calls or romantic dinners, facts that Marcus seemed to discover with increasing irritation. Can't you take him to David's for the evening? I overheard him ask Sarah one night when James was particularly fussy. I have clients coming for dinner. He's 8 weeks old, Marcus. He needs routine, familiar surroundings. He seems perfectly comfortable with David. The casual way he suggested passing James off to me, like lending out a car or borrowing a book, revealed everything about Marcus's understanding of parenthood. Children were accessories to be displayed when convenient and stored elsewhere when they interfered with adult plans. But I treasured every moment Marcus found inconvenient. Late-night feedings when James and I had the quiet apartment to ourselves, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine while he drank his bottle. Early morning walks when he was alert and curious, pointing tiny hands at trees, cars, and dogs we encountered. Lazy afternoons when he napped on my chest while I read architectural journals, his steady breathing the most peaceful sound in the world. "You're a natural at this," Sarah said one Sunday, watching me change James's diaper with practiced efficiency while simultaneously entertaining him with silly faces that made him giggle. "I love him," I said simply. "Everything else follows from that." She studied my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus is having a harder time adjusting than he expected." Adjustment takes time. First-time parents always struggle initially. He says it doesn't feel natural to him, that he thought paternal instincts would kick in automatically. I paused in my diaper-changing routine. "And they haven't?" "Not the way they did for you." Sarah's voice carried worry and disappointment. "He loves James, but he doesn't seem to enjoy the day-to-day reality of caring for him." Welcome to parenthood, I thought, but didn't say. The daily grind of feeding, changing, soothing, and protecting was precisely what made the relationship meaningful. One could love a baby in theory. Caring for one required sacrifice, patience, and the willingness to put someone else's needs first consistently. "Maybe he needs more one-on-one time with James," I suggested diplomatically. "I've tried that. James gets fussy without you or me around. Marcus takes it personally, like James is rejecting him. Or maybe James was responding to the emotional reality that Marcus remained essentially a stranger despite living in the same apartment. Babies were remarkably intuitive about consistency and commitment. As James approached 3 months old, our unusual arrangement had settled into a functional routine. Sarah handled nighttime care and medical appointments, I managed daily logistics and emergencies, and Marcus contributed financially and attended social events where James could be displayed as evidence of his family man status. It wasn't traditional, but it worked. James was healthy, happy, and surrounded by adults who prioritized his welfare. I told myself that was enough, even as I watched Marcus treat fatherhood like a hobby he might outgrow. By James's 4th month, the fairy tale Marcus and Sarah had constructed around their reunion began showing severe structural damage. The romantic fantasy of raising their baby together crashed against the unglamorous reality of sleepless nights, endless laundry, and a tiny human who demanded attention every few hours. Marcus's business trips became more prolonged and more frequent, expanding the client base, he explained, but I suspected he was escaping the chaos of life with an infant. Sarah grew increasingly exhausted, trying to manage full-time motherhood while maintaining her career and relationship. "I can take James overnight more often," I offered during one of our coffee meetings, now relocated to child-friendly cafes with high chairs and diaper-changing stations. "Give you and, Marcus some time together." Sarah's smile looked forced. "That's sweet, but couples need to work through these challenges together. Having you solve our problems isn't healthy." But I was already solving their problems. When James ran a fever and Marcus was in Los Angeles, I drove Sarah to the emergency pediatric clinic at midnight. When their washing machine broke and they were buried under dirty baby clothes, I brought laundry to my apartment. When Marcus forgot to pick up formula on his way home from work, I made emergency supply runs. "You're more reliable than his biological father," Sarah said one evening, exhaustion making her more honest than usual. James had been fussy all day, and Marcus had retreated to his home office for important client calls. "I'm just more available," I said diplomatically, bouncing James against my shoulder until his crying subsided. "Availability is a choice, David. Marcus could make different choices if he wanted to." The admission hung between us like a confession. Sarah was beginning to see the same patterns I'd recognized from the beginning. Marcus treated fatherhood like a part-time job he could abandon when more interesting opportunities arose. The breaking point came during James's 5th month. I arrived for my usual morning visit to find Sarah crying at the kitchen table, still in pajamas at 10 a.m., while James screamed from his crib. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately going to get James while scanning the apartment for signs of crisis. "Marcus left this morning for a 2-week trip to San Francisco," Sarah said through tears. "He didn't tell me until last night, just announced it like I was his secretary getting his schedule update." 2 weeks? I settled into the rocking chair with James, who quieted immediately against my chest. "What's the emergency?" "New client presentation. Potential expansion opportunity, career-defining moment. Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. All the same excuses he used to use when he left me the first time. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Marcus Rodriguez was Funda. Mentally, the same man who'd abandoned Sarah 7 years ago, just with better suits and more sophisticated justifications for his selfishness. I can stay here while he's gone, I offered. Take the guest room, help with night feedings. David, I can't keep depending on you to fix my relationship problems. You're not depending on me to fix your relationship. You're depending on me to help care for our son. Our son. The phrase slipped out naturally, but Sarah's eyes widened at the possessive pronoun. He's not our son, she said carefully. He's my son, and you're his adoptive father. There's a difference. Is there? Because I'm the one who gets up with him at 2 a.m. when he's teething. I'm the one who knows he likes his bottle exactly room temperature and hates having his face wiped after eating. I'm the one who reads him the same book every night because it makes him smile. Sarah stared at me with an expression mixing gratitude, guilt, and something that might have been recognition. Marcus says you're trying to replace him. Marcus is replacing himself by choosing his career over his family. Again. I kept my voice gentle but firm. I'm just making sure James doesn't suffer for his father's priorities. Biological father? She corrected automatically. Right, his biological father's priorities. That afternoon, while Sarah napped and James played on a blanket at my feet, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer. Emily, it's David Brown. I need to discuss modifying the custody arrangement for James. What kind of modification? I want to request primary custody if Marcus abandons his parental responsibilities. A long pause. David, that's a significant legal step. You'd need to prove abandonment, and courts are reluctant to remove biological parents' rights. What constitutes abandonment, legally speaking? Extended absence with Ute providing support, failure to maintain contact with the child, demonstrated lack of interest in the child's welfare. Emily's voice carried professional caution, but David, you'd be inserting yourself into a custody battle between James's biological parents. James's biological father is currently in San Francisco, prioritizing client presentations over his 5-month-old son. His biological mother is exhausted from single-handedly managing parenthood while trying to maintain a relationship with someone who treats fatherhood as a hobby. And you think you can provide better stability? I looked down at James, who was contentedly chewing on a soft toy, completely trusting that I would protect him from harm. I think I already am providing better stability. I'll research the precedents, but David, be very careful here. You could be opening a legal can of worms that affects everyone involved. After hanging up, I sat with James in the quiet apartment, thinking about the choice ahead of me. I could continue being the part-time father who filled gaps in Marcus's attention, grateful for whatever access Sarah allowed me, or I could fight for the stability James deserved, even if it meant destroying the comfortable fiction that our unusual arrangement was working perfectly. James looked up at me with Sarah's eyes and grabbed my finger with Marcus's stubborn grip, but his smile, that was all his own, bright and trusting and utterly dependent on the adults around him to make the right choices. I'd already made mine. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with James babbling happily in his high chair while I prepared his breakfast. Sarah had requested the test during Marcus's absence, claiming she needed absolute certainty for legal and medical records. I'd agreed reluctantly, fearing the results might somehow weaken my legal standing as James's adoptive father. But curiosity had gotten the better of me. After 7 months of loving this child unconditionally, I wanted to know whose genetic legacy he carried. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen counter for an hour while I fed James, changed his diaper, and played peekaboo games that made him giggle with delight. Whatever the test revealed couldn't change how I felt about him, but it might change everything about our future. Finally, with James napping peacefully in his portable crib, I tore open the official laboratory envelope and unfolded the results. The words blurred together at first, medical terminology and percentage calculations that my shocked brain struggled to process. Then the key phrase jumped out with stunning clarity. Probability of paternity, 99.7%. David Brown is the biological father. I read the sentence 3 times before its meaning penetrated. James wasn't Marcus's son. He was mine. Biologically, genetically, completely mine. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, then stopped. Who could I call? Sarah, who'd deceived me about the baby's paternity, Marcus, who'd unknowingly been raising another man's child, my lawyer, who'd helped me adopt my biological son. The timeline rushed through my mind with mathematical precision. James was born exactly 9 months after Sarah and I had made love for the last time, 2 weeks before she'd confessed her affair and asked for a divorce. The night she'd claimed was a goodbye, a final moment of intimacy before ending our marriage. That night had created our son. I stared at James sleeping peacefully, his features suddenly clearly recognizable as my own. The shape of his ears, The curve of his chin, even his sleep expressions, mirrored photographs of me as a baby. How had I missed it? How had we all missed it? Sarah had to have known, or at least suspected. The timing was too precise for coincidence, and she was too smart to have miscalculated something this important. She'd let Marcus believe he was the father while legally ensuring I would be responsible for raising my biological child. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. James has been fussy today. Can you come over early? I looked at the DNA results, then at my sleeping son, then back at the phone. Sarah had orchestrated the most elaborate deception I'd ever encountered, managing to ensure her biological child would be raised by his biological father while maintaining her relationship with the man she thought she loved. But why? Why not simply tell me the truth from the beginning? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. Suppose Sarah had admitted James was my son. In that case, she'd have felt obligated to stay in our marriage or at least attempt reconciliation. By maintaining the fiction that he was Marcus's child, she'd freed herself to pursue her romantic fantasy while ensuring I would still be committed to raising him. It was brilliant, manipulative, and utterly unfair to everyone involved, especially James, who deserved to know his true parentage. I gathered the baby supplies and drove to Sarah and Marcus's apartment with the DNA results burning like evidence in my jacket pocket. Sarah met me at the door, looking frazzled and exhausted. "Thank God you're here," she said, taking my coat. "He's been crying for 2 hours. I think he's getting another tooth." I found James in his crib, red-faced and frustrated, his tiny fists waving in protest at the unfairness of teething. The moment I picked him up, he settled against my chest with that complete trust I'd grown to treasure. "You're the only one who can calm him like that," Sarah observed, settling onto the couch beside me. "It's like he knows you're his." She stopped mid-sentence, her face paling as she realized what she'd almost said. "His what, Sarah?" "His adoptive father, the one who's always been there for him." I pulled the DNA results from my pocket and placed them on the coffee table between us. "We need to talk." Sarah stared at the envelope without touching it, her face cycling through expressions of shock, fear, and resignation. "You had them run the test." "You requested the test. I just picked up the results." I kept my voice calm despite the storm raging in my chest. "James is my biological son." She picked up the papers with trembling hands, though her lack of surprise confirmed my suspicions. "David, I can explain." "I hope so. Because right now, I'm trying to understand how my wife let me adopt my child while convincing another man he was the father." Sarah set down the results and buried her face in her hands. "I wasn't certain. The timing was so close, and I wanted to believe it was Marcus's baby because that made everything easier." "Easier for who?" "For everyone." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "If James were Marcus's son, then my leaving you made sense. I could build a new family with his biological father, but if he was yours, if he were mine, you'd have felt obligated to stay married to me. I'd have felt guilty for destroying our family over an affair when we had a child together." Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. "I'd have spent the rest of my life wondering if I stayed for love or obligation." I stared at the woman I'd loved for 7 years, trying to reconcile the person I thought I'd married with someone capable of such elaborate deception. "So you decided to let Marcus raise my son and let me adopt him, thinking he belonged to someone else." "I decided to ensure James would be loved and cared for, regardless of who his biological father was." Sarah's voice gained strength. "And it worked. You love him completely. Marcus has been a devoted father. James has had multiple adults committed to his welfare. Marcus has been absent more often than present, and you know it. That's recent. He was devoted initially. He was devoted to the idea of being a father, not the reality of caring for a child. I stood up, still holding James, who had fallen asleep against my shoulder. "Sarah, how could you let another man believe he was raising his biological child when you knew he might not be?" "I didn't know. The timing was ambiguous, and I hoped you hoped. You built 3 people's lives around hope and wishful thinking." I paced the small living room, trying to process the magnitude of her deception. "What were you planning to do if the DNA test proved James was mine? Just pretend you'd never requested it?" Sarah's silence answered my question. She'd planned to bury the truth permanently, maintaining our complicated arrangement while never revealing that James was my biological son. "I need time to think about this," I said, gathering James's supplies, "and we need to decide what to tell Marcus." "David, please don't tell him. Not yet. He's been James's father for 7 months. This will destroy him. He's been playing house with my wife while unknowingly helping raise my biological son. I think he deserves the truth." "What about James? What's best for him?" I looked down at my sleeping son, my actual son, and felt the full weight of biological connection settle over me like armor. "James deserves honesty, from the adults in his life. All of us have been lying to him from the moment he was born. As I walked toward the door with James in my arms, Sarah called after me. David, what happens now? I turned back to face the mother of my child, the woman who'd deceived me so thoroughly I'd unknowingly adopted my son. Now we figure out how to build James's life on truth instead of convenient fiction. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through 7 months of careful arrangements. Everything we'd built was about to change, but for the first time since Sarah had announced her pregnancy, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. James was my son. Biologically, legally, emotionally. No matter what happened next, that truth would anchor every decision I made. Marcus returned from San Francisco on a Friday evening, tanned and confident fro. His successful client presentations, carrying expensive gifts for Sarah and a teddy bear for James. He found me in his living room feeding my son his evening bottle while Sarah paced by the window. "David," he said with forced pleasantness, "I didn't expect to find you here this late." "We need to have a conversation," I said, not looking up from James, who was contentedly drinking his formula while gripping my finger. "All three of us." Marcus set down his briefcase and gifts, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion. "What kind of conversation?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The DNA test results came back." "Already? That was fast." Marcus loosened his tie and settled into his usual chair. "Well, let's put this paternity question to rest once and for all. Though I think it's pretty obvious who James favors. He has my eyes and your stubborn chin, Sarah." I pulled the laboratory results from the side table and held them out to him. "He has my eyes and Sarah's stubborn chin." Marcus took the papers with confidence that evaporated as he read the first paragraph. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a cold fury I'd never seen before. "This is impossible," he said, rereading the results. "The timing doesn't work. Sarah was already pregnant when we reconnected." "Sarah was pregnant with my child when you reconnected," I corrected gently. "We made love 2 weeks before she asked for the divorce. James was conceived during our marriage, not during your affair." Marcus looked between Sarah and me, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. "But she told me the baby was mine. You both told me that." "I thought he was yours," Sarah said quickly, "but the timing was so close, and I wanted to believe." "You wanted to believe?" Marcus's voice rose dangerously. "You've had me acting as father to another man's child for 7 months, because you wanted to believe?" "You've been wonderful with James," Sarah said desperately. "You love him. That doesn't change just because of biology." Marcus stared at James, who had finished his bottle and was looking around the room with alert curiosity. "Doesn't change? Everything changes. I've been supporting another man's child, planning our future around someone else's son, introducing him to my family as my heir." "He's still the same baby you've been caring for," I pointed out. "DNA doesn't change who he is or how much you've loved him." "Don't," Marcus's voice carried a warning. "Don't you dare lecture me about loving this child when you've known all along he was yours." "I didn't know. I found out 3 days ago, same as you." "But you suspected, didn't you? That's why you were so eager to adopt him, why you insisted on being involved in everything. You couldn't stand the thought of another man raising your biological son." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had felt an unexplainable connection to James from the beginning. This bond went deeper than legal documents or conscious choice. "I loved James before I knew he was mine biologically," I said firmly. "That love hasn't changed because of a test result." "Well, mine has." Marcus stood abruptly, his expensive suit rumpled from travel and stress. "I can't look at him the same way knowing he's not my son." Sarah moved toward Marcus, her hands reaching out pleadingly. "Marcus, please, James needs stability and consistency. He's known you as a father figure." "He's known David as his primary caregiver," Marcus corrected coldly. "I've been the part-time substitute father while his real dad did all the heavy lifting." That was a surprisingly accurate self-assessment from someone who'd spent months avoiding the less convenient aspects of parenthood. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and frightened. Marcus walked to the window, staring out at the city lights he'd been so eager to conquer when he'd returned to Chicago. "And now I figure out how to extract myself from this situation without destroying my life." "James isn't a situation to extract yourself from," I said, standing with my son still in my arms. "He's a child who's known you as a father for 7 months." "He's your child," Marcus replied without turning around. "Your responsibility, your future, your problem to solve." The casual dismissal of a baby he'd claimed to love revealed everything about Marcus Rodriguez's character. When James had been his biological son, he'd represented legacy and continuation. As another man's child, he'd become an inconvenience to be discarded. "So that's it?" Sarah asked. 7 months of fatherhood, and you're just walking away? What would you like me to do, Sarah? Pretend I don't know the truth? Raise David's son while he gets to be the real father? Marcus finally turned from the window. "I came back to Chicago for you. to build a family with you, not to play house with your ex-husband's child. We can still build a family, Sarah said desperately. James doesn't have to change anything between us. James changes everything. Marcus began loosening his tie with sharp, angry movements. Every time I look at him, I'll see proof that you were sleeping with your husband while claiming to love me. Every milestone will remind me that I'm raising another man's son. I felt James tense in my arms, picking up on the adult tension even if he couldn't understand the words. Maybe this conversation should continue when James isn't listening, I suggested. James can't understand what we're saying, Marcus snapped. Children sense emotional atmosphere long before they understand language, I replied. And right now, this atmosphere is toxic. Marcus gathered his gifts from San Francisco, expensive tokens of affection that now seemed pointless. I need time to think about this, process what it means. Take all the time you need, I said, settling back into the chair with James. But understand that regardless of what you decide, I'm James's father, legally and biologically. That's not changing. After Marcus left for a hotel, Sarah collapsed onto the couch with exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. I've destroyed everything, haven't I? You've revealed everything, I corrected. The destruction was already there, hidden under lies and assumptions. What happens to us now? To James? I looked down at my son, my actual son, who was falling asleep in my arms with complete trust that I would protect him from harm. Now we build James's life on truth instead of deception, whatever that looks like. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. James was my son in every way that mattered, and no one could take that away from me ever again. The next 3 weeks transformed our complicated arrangement into something resembling an actual family structure. Marcus, true to his character, chose the path of least resistance, complete withdrawal from James's life, rather than navigating the complexity of loving a child who wasn't biologically his. It's better this way, Sarah said, though her red-rimmed eyes suggested otherwise. Clean break, no confusion for James as he grows up. I disagreed but kept my opinion to myself. James would someday ask about the man who'd lived with his mother during his first 7 months, and we'd have to explain how biology had trumped love in Marcus Rodriguez's value system. Sarah and I developed new routines based on honesty rather than legal fiction. I was James's father, not adoptive father, not legal guardian, just father. Sarah was his mother. We were divorced parents who would co-parent our son with the maturity to prioritize his needs over our personal history. I want to move back to the suburbs, Sarah announced one evening as we bathed James together in her downtown apartment. This place holds too many memories of Marcus, and James needs space to play outside. What about your job? I can work remotely most days, commute when necessary. She lifted James from the bathwater, wrapping him in a soft towel. I've been thinking about freelance consulting anyway. More flexibility for motherhood. I dried James's tiny toes, marveling at how perfectly formed they were, how his entire body was a miniature version of human perfection. Where in the suburbs? Maybe close to you? If that wouldn't be weird. The question carried layers of meaning neither of us was ready to examine directly. Would we attempt reconciliation? Could we rebuild a friendship strong enough to co-parent effectively? Was there still love buried under all the hurt and betrayal? It would be convenient, I said carefully. For James. For James, she agreed. Sarah found a house 6 blocks from my apartment, close enough for easy transitions but far enough to maintain independence. I helped her move, carrying boxes that contained the detritus of her failed relationship with Marcus and the beginning of her new life as a single mother. I owe you an apology, she said as we assembled James's crib in his new nursery. A real one, for everything. I tightened the screws that would hold our son's bed together, considering her words. Which part specifically? All of it. The affair, the deception about James's parentage, letting you adopt your child, making you fight for a relationship that should have been automatic. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, folding tiny clothes. I was selfish and scared and completely unfair to everyone. You were trying to have everything you wanted without paying the full price for any of it, I said, not unkindly. It's human nature, even if it's not sustainable. Do you forgive me? The question hung between us while I considered my answer. Did I forgive the woman who'd destroyed our marriage while ensuring I'd still be responsible for raising our child? Could I separate Sarah, the mother of my son, from Sarah, the wife who'd betrayed me? I forgive you for James's sake, I said finally. He deserves parents who can work together without carrying, but not for my sake. Sarah, you made choices that prioritized your happiness over everyone else's truth. Those choices had consequences we're all still living with. I tested the crib's stability, making sure it would keep our son safe through countless nights. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending those choices didn't matter. She nodded, tears threatening but not quite falling. I understand. As we finished setting up James's room, I realized that our relationship had fundamentally changed from what it had been during our marriage or the complicated months of our arrangement with Marcus. We were no longer husband and wife or ex-spouses navigating awkward boundaries. We were James's parents, bound together by love for our son rather than romantic attachment to each other. It felt surprisingly comfortable. James thrived with the new stability. His sleep patterns improved, his development accelerated, and his personality emerged more clearly each day. He was curious like Sarah, determined like me, and completely his person in ways that delighted both of us. "He's going to be stubborn," Sarah observed one afternoon, watching James persist in trying to reach a toy that was clearly beyond his grasp rather than accepting our help. "Wonder where he gets that," I said, gently moving the toy closer so he could grab it successfully. "Definitely from you," she replied with the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in months. These moments of easy companionship became more frequent as we settled into our co-parenting routine. I had James 3 nights a week and alternate weekends. Sarah handled the daily care when I was at work. We made major decisions together and tried to present unified approaches to discipline and encouragement. "We're good at this," Sarah said one evening after we'd successfully gotten James through his first real tantrum using consistent, patient respi. One says, "We always were good partners when we focused on the same goal," I replied. "We just lost sight of what that goal should be." She studied my face in the soft light of James's nursery. "David, do you think we could ever what? Be a family again. Be a family." The question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure had finally been asked directly. Could I trust Sarah again? Could she love me the way I'd always loved her? Could James grow up in an intact home with parents who were partners rather than just co-parents? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Too much has happened to pick up where we left off simply. But maybe we could start somewhere new, build something different but better?" I looked down at James, sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely unaware that his parents were discussing his entire future. "Maybe," I said. "But it would have to be real this time, Sarah, built on truth instead of convenience or obligation." "I understand." Whether we rebuilt our marriage or remained devoted co-parents, one thing was sure: James would grow up knowing exactly who he was and who loved him unconditionally. No more lies, no more deception, no more adults using a child to solve their emotional problems. Just truth, love, and the daily commitment to put our son's needs first. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of the house where Sarah lived. I had bought together, not as desperate exes clinging to shared custody, but as partners who'd chosen to rebuild our family on a foundation of hard-won honesty. James, now almost 3 years old, sat in his high chair, methodically smearing peanut butter across his toast while narrating his actions with the serious concentration only toddlers could manage. "Daddy, bread needs more peanut butter. More. More peanut butter coming up, buddy," I said, adding another dollop to his already for loaded breakfast. Sarah emerged from the hallway, still in her robe, her hair mussed from sleep. She wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder as we watched our son conduct his breakfast symphony. "He gets his perfectionism from you," she murmured against my neck. "And his determination to have things exactly his way from you," I replied, leaning back into her embrace. Our journey back to each other hadn't been automatic or straightforward after Marcus left. Sarah and I spent 18 months in couples therapy, working through layers of hurt, betrayal, and the complicated dynamics of co-parenting while navigating our relationship. Dr. Patricia Wells, our therapist, had been brutally honest about our chances. "Most couples don't survive infidelity combined with this level of deception," she'd told us during our 3rd session. "The ones who do succeed share certain characteristics: genuine remorse, willingness to be completely transparent, and the ability to rebuild trust slowly." Sarah had demonstrated all 3 qualities consistently over those 18 months. She'd answered every question about her affair, submitted to complete financial transparency. She accepted my need for time and space to heal. Most importantly, she'd proven through daily actions that she was committed to building a life centered on our family rather than her desires. "I fell in love with the fantasy of Marcus," she'd admitted during one of our breakthrough sessions. "But I built a real life with you. I was just too stupid to understand the difference until I almost lost everything." The turning point had come 8 months ago, during James's 2nd birthday party. Sarah had organized everything herself: decorations, cake, guest list. But when James had a meltdown over his party hat, she'd looked directly to me for help, not because she couldn't handle the situation, but because she trusted me to know our son better than anyone else. As I'd calmed James down, and with patient words and familiar comfort, Sarah had watched with an expression I'd seen countless times during our marriage, but had forgotten during the chaos of our separation: complete love and admiration for the man I was when I was being the best version of myself. That's when I knew, she'd told me later that evening, after James was asleep and the last party guests had gone home. Watching you with our son, seeing how naturally you two connect, remembering why I fell in love with you in the first place. I want to come home, David. Home. The proposal had been mine, 6 months later, offered not with grand gestures or expensive rings, but with quiet certainty during an ordinary Tuesday evening while James played at our feet. Marry me again, I'd said, looking up from the architectural drawings I'd been reviewing. What? Sarah had laughed, thinking she'd misheard. Marry me again, not because of James, not because it's convenient, not because you feel obligated. Marry me because you choose me, knowing everything you know now about who we both are. She'd cried then, happy tears that washed away the last residue of our painful history. Yes, she'd whispered. Yes, I choose you. I choose us. We'd remarried in a small ceremony in our backyard, with James as our ring bearer and only our closest friends and family present. No grand declarations or fairy tale promises, just honest vows about choosing each other daily, prioritizing our family above individual desires, and building our future on truth instead of convenient fiction. Daddy! Mama! James's voice interrupted my memories. Look! I made a smiley face. Sure enough, he'd arranged his peanut butter toast into a crude but recognizable happy face, grinning with pride at his artistic achievement. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Sarah said, kissing the top of his head. You're so creative. Like Daddy with his buildings, James announced matter-of-factly. I make breakfast art, Daddy makes house art. Sarah and I exchanged amused glances over his head. At almost 3, James had definite opinions about everything and the vocabulary to express most of them. Speaking of house art, Sarah said, settling into her chair with coffee, how's the Henderson project coming along? Ahead of schedule and under budget, I replied, wiping peanut butter from James's face. They want to discuss designing their lake house next. That's wonderful. You love lakefront projects. The easy domestic conversation felt miraculous after everything we'd been through. We talked about work, James's development, weekend plans, and ordinary married couple topics that had once seemed impossible to reclaim. James finished his breakfast masterpiece and demanded to be lifted down from his chair. Play blocks, he announced, racing toward his toy corner with the boundless energy of childhood. I'll get him dressed for daycare, Sarah said, following their son's path of enthusiastic destruction through the living room. I can do it, I offered. You haven't finished your coffee. We can do it together, she said, smiling. Like everything else. Together. The word that had once felt foreign between us now described our approach to every aspect of daily life. We parented together, made decisions together, faced challenges together, and celebrated victories together. As I watched Sarah help James select his outfit for the day, a process that involved significant negotiation about which superhero t-shirt was appropriate for Tuesday, I thought about the man I'd been 3 years ago, devastated by betrayal and convinced my life was over. That man couldn't have imagined this kitchen, this morning, this family we'd built from the ashes of our first marriage. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he couldn't see what might still be possible. Daddy, come help, James called, struggling with his shula. Says that these are being naughty. I knelt beside my son, guiding his small fingers through the complex process of bow tying. At the same time, he provided helpful commentary about the rebellious nature of shoelaces. You know, Sarah said, watching us work together. I was thinking about Marcus yesterday. I glanced up, surprised. We rarely mentioned her ex-lover unless James asked questions about the early months of his life. What about him? I saw his engagement announcement in the Tribune. He's marrying someone 25 years younger, no children from previous relationships. Sarah's voice carried no regret, just observation. It made me realize how different our values were. Marcus Rodriguez had gotten exactly what he wanted. A beautiful wife with no complicated history, no children to interfere with his ambitions, no messy emotional baggage from past relationships. In his world, that probably represented the perfect outcome. Any regrets? I asked, though I was confident of the answer. Sarah looked around our kitchen, taking in the breakfast dishes, James's artwork on the refrigerator, the comfortable chaos of family life. Only that it took me so long to understand what real love looks like. And what does it look like? Like this, she said. Like choosing to show up every day, even when it's ordinary. Like putting someone else's needs first without being asked. Like building something together instead of just taking what you want. James completed his shoelace challenge and jumped up in triumph. I did it, Daddy, I did it all by myself. You did, I said, sweeping him into a congratulatory hug. You're getting so independent. Independence is good, Sarah observed, gathering James's daycare supplies, but it's even better when you choose to share it with people you love. As we prepared to leave for our respective days, Sarah to her consulting office, Mess to daycare, me to the architectural firm where I'd been promoted to senior partner, I reflected on the strange mathematics of love and loss. I'd lost a wife to betrayal, but gained a son through deception. I'd lost the marriage I thought I wanted, but gained the family I'd never imagined possible. Most surprisingly, I'd lost my trust in Sarah completely, and then chosen to rebuild it stronger than before. "Ready for another day?" Sarah asked, kissing me goodbye at the front door while James waited impatiently by the car. "Ready for all of them," I replied, meaning every word. As we drove away from our house, the one we'd chosen together, with bedrooms for the children we hoped to have and space for the life we were still building, I thought about the story I'd tell James someday when he was old enough to understand complicated truths. I'd tell him about the power of unconditional love, about second chances earned through daily choices, about the difference between biological connection and genuine commitment. I'd explain how his parents had lost their way for a while but found something better when they decided to build their future on honesty instead of convenient lies. Most importantly, I'd tell him that he had been entirely loved from the moment he existed, by his mother who'd carried him, by the father who'd raised him knowing he was his own, by the man who'd walked away when love required a sacrifice he wasn't willing to make. "James will have a good story," Sarah said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "He'll have a true story," I corrected. "That's even better." And as we pulled into the daycare parking lot where James would play with friends while his parents worked to build the secure, honest life he deserved, I knew that sometimes the endings nobody sees coming are the ones that matter most. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed us had led to the family we were meant to be all along, not because of genetics or legal documents or romantic fairy tales, but because we'd chosen every single day to put love into action. That was a story worth living and worth sharing. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where the truth was completely different from what you believed? Let me know your thoughts, and click the box on the left to hear another incredible story of love, betrayal, and unexpected redemption.